I'm Jerry Gibson from Dow Chemical, and where I want to start is go back and focus on some of the comments that Don Taylor made yesterday. And he talked about Dow. He talked about, in particular, a focus on some of the challenges and opportunities we faced in integrating with Roman Haas. And in particular, when you think about the challenge that has been undertaken, and think about Dow in the sense of historically we're known as a company that really undertakes consistently to achieve engineering and manufacturing excellence. So we have that history, but what happens when we go through a major integration? Among other things, it's really a test of our asset information management strategies and our overall strategies. So from the standpoint of how has that gone, and again, what I hope you heard yesterday is that it's going well. That seems to corroborate that we do address information in a strategic way, and that we apparently are able to adapt. If you look at, again, the outputs, and the outputs are being able to adapt to meet business needs, to continue to transform in terms of what's going to be required in the future, and then also from operational objectives to be able to be very clear about meeting the process safety's first, and also the clear business deliverable objectives from a manufacturing sense. So that's all fine and good, but what does that tell us, and what insight does it give about going forward? And also this bigger picture about, and Gary, I appreciated you used the term larger ecosystem. I agree with that entirely, because we have to more and more address that larger ecosystem. So how do we develop and improve our approach to information management, our strategies, our approaches, our tools? One is that we really need models and standards. On the standard side, one example is the work that has been driven through FIATEC, and by the way, I am the chair of the Board of Advisors of FIATEC, so Dow Chemical is making a serious commitment here. And so ISO 15926 is an example of a standard where by developing the standard, we basically come to agreement on what we have together in terms of requirements, and by implementing the standard, we ultimately understand how we want to go about acting on those requirements. We need models, and personally, I'm a fan of the ARC, the Asset Information Management Model. I think it's a good one, a good starting point. And part of what it tells us is when we look at either examining what we have or looking at designing new, we need to think about all the necessary components. We need to think about policies, we need to think about people, processes, and technology. And by the way, I said technology last. Technology is important, but again, we talk all the time about the fact that we have lots of technology. We need it, we need more of it, but this total approach has absolutely got to be addressed, and even more, it's got to be addressed not just within an entity, but it's got to be addressed across entities, again, within this larger virtual enterprise. I'll just give a couple of examples about things that I think that Dow does well, which I'm sure you would agree with. But for example, thinking about this big picture on asset lifecycle, one is asset project or project development that really incorporates fully what the business wants to accomplish and this long-term view. Another one is basically a very highly disciplined approach to developing project and asset information, doing effective handover, and then in the sense of operations and maintenance, being very clear, not just at the facility level, but also at the business and the corporate level around things like process safety and reliability, reliability being both asset reliability and customer fulfillment reliability, those being managed to targets at all those levels. So there are, among all of us, and I'll make, I think, again, some of the same points that Gear made, there are things that all of us are doing well. There are things that we want to do. Part of the challenge we face is how to continue to come to agreements and work together on really making some more rapid advances.
I'll keep this very short and simple. I think the biggest breakthrough we've seen in the last 10 years is we've seen people accept that they need to have a plan. 10 years ago, I spent a lot of time just evangelizing the concept. You should have a plan, and you should have a plan more than 30 days before startup of an asset. At the time, that was a little bit crazy. People are like, well, why do you need that? You've got all the paper, you know, we back up the dump truck. I think Gare had a clever picture of that. And there was a lot of debate about why you needed that. The industry's coming around, and people are starting to see that. We do see other challenges emerging. Many owner-operators still struggle with basic executive incentive systems between OpEx and CapEx. The very best in class is when they can take a seasoned person in ops, bring them to a new project as the project exec, do the project, and then run the plant for a few years. That tends to create a good incentive system, and they think about everything they learned on their last plant, and they bring that forward, and they tend to forward plan a lot more than others. Other companies do it differently, and there's lots of different ways to achieve it, but I think that's still a challenge, is the OpEx, CapEx incentive divide. The technology, I think, is evolving probably as fast as the people and process are. We're seeing this, so we're seeing the owners and EPCs are improving their process and management, and likewise the technology is rising to meet the challenges that they face, because you learn as you go. Not everything can be predicted. But still, I think the overall important thing is the same. Have a plan and have it early. The more you do that, the better off you'll be.
I want to just make one quick one, and I think you've heard my voice enough for the last half an hour. But one quick one is, we see the best success when owner and operator is the same company. And I'm not saying that that should be the norm, but that just seems to kind of tie with what Patrick said about CapEx and OpEx. What we're seeing is that if there's separation between those two, we work for the CapEx people, and the guys that are going to get the benefit of the information are the OpEx guys. And therefore, we have a conflict between who is actually buying from us versus the guys that are taking the benefit of it, and therefore, there's a breakdown. And I think that can be done with what Patrick said, a good plan, but it has to be a very comprehensive plan between the owner and the operator when that is not the same.
Yeah, and we see the same thing from SAP's point of view. We have a unique advantage because we see the whole life cycle, right? We see we have a unique advantage because we see the whole life cycle from plan to decommission, right? And we've seen various strategies along each of the processes. And where we've seen success is when you focus on the end game, the end result, right? And you look at the KPIs that affect and that are important to that end result. So then you look at, okay, what data is required to support those KPIs, right? And some of that data may reside in legacy systems. Gear, as you said, right, you had over 250 systems. Some of that data may reside in your ERP system, and the key is to make sure you have strategies and data extraction tools, et cetera, to get to that data without having to replicate it at a reasonable cost, right? And then you can build up those KPIs, and then you could manage to that end result that you're really looking for. I think that the best advice is don't boil the ocean. You know, start in specific areas in that process and build upon those successes, and that's where we've seen, you know, best-in-class companies have the most success.
I think from a trending perspective, I think in validation of all these ideas, in our customer base of nuclear owner-operators, as Gary said, I think it's an advantage to be an owner-operator. You know, here's a case where information management they've had to take seriously post 3 Mile Island for the last 20 years, and have really, from that perspective, done all these things we're talking about from we can't do business unless we do it. But what I've seen as far as a trend in the last couple of years is those same owner-operators that have nuclear facilities are taking those same processes and moving them over into their fossil operations, where they don't have that regulatory requirement, but they want the efficiency of getting those outages done. They want the efficiency of those everyday handovers of even small jobs to be just as cost effective as they're seeing in their nuclear facility. And I think that's just a validation of these concepts. And hopefully as we get in these new builds, you know, the big handovers will be, through these standards, I think, are just key to continue that trend, because I think we've just made a huge headway in the last 20 years coming out of power.
I don't know how I can top all that. That was good stuff, guys. I do think that I want to put a challenge to the owner-operators out there, is that I think especially in North America with the brownfield situation, we do have other things that are occurring here, but there's got to be a thought, compelling events to move that information and start from the operations and maintenance side of things. So I have to agree with the operator and the CapEx OpEx side of things. But I think we have to, right now, safety is probably a compelling event that's getting people to go back and look at it all the way to the front and carry that across. But I think that as a challenge to the organizations out there is that the owners coming together to have other compelling events other than just safety to help that, because that's a regulatory type of thing, as you said with nuclear, and start to pull that across to other benefits. So my 2 cents would be is that's where I'd like to see us all move to, and I think as vendors of software, we will help that process. I would say technology is already beyond where we need to be. I think what we have to do is the people and processes to put in place to make that happen. Well, then we're here to enable that. So.
It is right, and you saw my little 4-column thing there about our history. The move to cloud computing happened then in that 3rd state that we did. And in fact, when we started it, there was nothing called cloud computing. That kind of was come in and got named into the industry after we started that effort, actually back in 2006. We did that to be able to untangle information sitting in an island by itself. We really needed it, but to be totally honest, we didn't necessarily see it as much of a life cycle at the beginning as where it has turned out to be more benefit in the longer term. We untangled it because we had a myriad of participants in our projects. We saw that our projects got more and more distributed, both physically and also between entities. So we saw that the customer wanted to be more participative. We saw the supply chain wanted to be more participative. We saw the kind of like the joint venture model to be able to do these very large projects got more and more prevalent. So that's why we open it up by going to cloud computing. And to go there, you really need to reassess your security model. You have to deal with security in a very, very different way than you do when everything is inside. And have we seen a lot of other people go that way yet? No. And that's probably why we are trying to do a little bit of missionary work on it, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, today we put everything into there. We put our systems into it, if that is in engineering or if it is SAP for our ERP or whatever, even the phone system, even our video system, everything we put into that cloud, and it just opens up the world very, very differently. And it changes a lot of things. I mentioned security model. It also changes the way you write and deploy your applications, the way you support it, but the benefit is going to be tremendous when we see more and more people go into that. And I think the model from an IT standpoint will change dramatically over the next 5 years, and we will see, as we see other people coming into it.
Just to add to that from a software solution provider, we're doing the same. We want to facilitate, that movement of data so that you can collaborate more with your suppliers, third party, et cetera. So, that's certainly part of our stated direction. Cloud computing, on-premise, on-device, mobility are all part of that movement to make sure that our customers can easily facilitate information exchange with their suppliers, customers, et cetera.